The scream tore through the air like glass shattering, echoing in the narrow apartment hallway as Emily dropped to her knees, clutching the letter that felt like a death sentence. Her hands trembled, not from cold but from the weight of betrayal inked in black and white. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she forced herself to read them again, as if punishing herself with their cruelty. The voice of her boss thundered in her mind, "You're no longer needed here." Emily whispered, "After all these years, I gave them everything." The flickering hallway light above buzzed harshly, casting fractured shadows across her tired face, her breath ragged and uneven. She felt the walls close in, as if the world itself wanted to erase her. Her phone buzzed on the floor, but she ignored it, pressing her forehead against the letter. "Why does it always end like this?" she muttered. Her pulse raced, her chest tightened, and for a moment she thought she might collapse into nothingness. But beneath the storm of despair, a flicker of anger stirred, faint yet undeniable, like an ember refusing to die in the rain. The morning sun filtered weakly through half-drawn curtains, painting Emily's living room in pale gold that felt cruelly bright after her sleepless night. She sat hunched on the sofa, clutching a chipped coffee mug, though the coffee had long gone cold. Her mind replayed the dismissal like a broken record, each word striking harder than the last. The clock ticked loudly, mocking her with its steady rhythm. Emily whispered, "Years of silence, years of sacrifice, and they discard me without hesitation." She looked toward her bookshelf stacked with self-help titles, unread, their spines gathering dust. She had once believed answers could be found there, but now every page felt hollow. Her phone buzzed again, messages from her colleague Mark flooding in. He had always been blunt, cutting through her defenses with harsh honesty, but she could not bear to hear him yet. Emily muttered, "I just need to breathe." Yet deep down, she knew silence would not heal her this time. Emily stood before her bathroom mirror, face pale, eyes swollen from the storm of tears. She dabbed cold water on her cheeks, hoping to wash away exhaustion, but the reflection stared back with quiet accusation. She remembered being told as a child, "Stay quiet, don't cause trouble, blend in." Those words had followed her like chains, keeping her silent even when injustice burned. She whispered, "I let them shape me into someone invisible." The fluorescent bathroom light buzzed faintly, exposing every crack in the walls and in her spirit. She forced herself to straighten, but her shoulders sagged as soon as she did. The old toothbrush holder rattled as she gripped the sink tightly, knuckles whitening. "This is not who I am," she muttered, voice breaking yet carrying an unfamiliar edge of defiance. Later that day, Emily sat on a park bench, bundled in her worn coat, staring blankly as children laughed and played in the distance. Their carefree voices stabbed her heart with memories of what hope once felt like. She whispered, "How did I drift so far from who I wanted to be?" The winter air bit at her cheeks, making her tears sting, yet she did not wipe them away. Her phone buzzed again, Mark's name lighting the screen. She hesitated, thumb hovering, but then let it fall back into her pocket. "Not yet," she sighed. A jogger passed by, nodding politely, but she avoided his gaze, folding into herself. She thought of the sacrifices, the endless overtime, the silence she had endured just to be dismissed without a thought. Yet beneath it all, that ember of defiance glowed faintly, waiting. Night returned heavy and unkind, but Emily could not stay silent in her apartment. She walked through the dim streets, each step echoing against cracked pavement, her breath misting in the icy air. Neon signs flickered, broken letters, spelling half-forgotten promises. She whispered, "I won't let them erase me." The words surprised her, carrying more strength than she expected. Passing a darkened shop window, she caught her reflection, a woman worn and scarred, but still standing. For the first time in years, she met her own eyes, and did not look away. The city's noise was distant, muffled, as if the world itself was pausing to witness her awakening. Emily straightened her shoulders, pulling her coat tighter, the ember inside her now glowing brighter, whispering of battles ahead. Emily sat at her kitchen table, bills scattered like tiny knives across the wooden surface. The morning light pierced through dirty blinds, unforgiving and sharp. Her hand shook as she held a pen, hovering over an overdue notice that screamed failure. She muttered, "One letter ends my job, and now every letter feels like a threat." The silence of the apartment weighed on her, pressing against her ribs like invisible hands. She thought of calling her parents but remembered their words too well. "Why can't you just be normal, Emily?" The sting of their dismissal lingered longer than her boss. She slammed the pen down, frustration crackling in her chest. "I am not nothing," she whispered, but her voice faltered, betraying the doubt still gnawing at her. Later that day, Emily finally answered Mark's call. His voice came sharp through the speaker, cutting like glass. "You can't just hide, Emily," he said, tone blunt but concerned. She pressed the phone to her ear, staring at peeling wallpaper. "I'm not hiding, I'm regrouping," she replied, though the words felt hollow. Mark sighed, the sound heavy. "You've been overlooked long enough, but they won't give you a stage. You'll have to take it." Emily closed her eyes, imagining his expression, the way his brow furrowed when he spoke truths she hated to hear. Her chest tightened as if the walls leaned closer. She whispered, "I don't know if I can." Mark's silence lingered before he finally said, "Then you'll keep breaking in circles until you do." Emily forced herself outside, walking aimlessly through the city streets, the cold air slapping her awake. Cars roared past, neon signs flickered, but the noise only reminded her of how muted her own voice had always been. She remembered meetings where she stayed silent, letting others take credit while her ideas rotted unspoken. She whispered, "I gave them everything, and they gave me silence." Passing a cafe, she glimpsed people laughing, their faces bright and unburdened. The sight stabbed her with envy and longing. Her reflection in the glass showed not a stranger, but someone half alive, pressed against the margins of her own life. For the first time she clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, whispering, "I won't stay invisible." That evening, Emily sat with Mark at a quiet diner, the clink of cutlery and low hum of conversation filling the space. Mark leaned back in the booth, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You think the world owes you kindness?" he asked. She frowned, heat rising to her cheeks. "No, but I thought effort mattered." Mark smirked faintly, shaking his head. "Effort without voice is just labor. You're too scared to demand more." Emily looked down at the greasy menu, her reflection warped in its plastic. His words cut deep, but truth hummed inside them. She muttered, "I don't know how." Mark leaned forward, voice low. "Then, start by not apologizing for existing." Her breath caught, the phrase echoing long after the words fell silent. Back at home, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, Mark's words looping in her mind. Not apologizing for existing. The phrase clawed at something deep inside her, pulling memories of childhood scoldings and the silent compromises of adulthood. She clenched the blanket, knuckles white, as if holding onto a lifeline. She whispered, "I've spent my life erasing myself to make others comfortable." The moonlight spilled through her window, pale and cold, illuminating her hunched form. For the first time, her whisper did not sound like surrender, but like the beginning of resistance. She raised her head, eyes steady, the ember in her chest glowing hotter. "No more hiding," she said firmly. The silence answered, but it no longer felt suffocating, it felt waiting. Morning arrived like an unpaid debt, and Emily spread her resume across the kitchen table, as if laying out a fractured map. She edited bullet points until the words felt thin and weightless. An email pinged with the subject line "Opportunity Update," and her stomach turned cold. She opened it and saw a polite rejection wrapped in corporate perfume. Emily said, "They don't even know me. And still, I am not enough." She stared at the screen until the letters blurred into gray fog. Mark texted, "Call me when you stop bracing for impact and start swinging." She muttered, "Easy for you to say," though she knew he earned his bite with scars. The blinds carved pale bars across her face, and she felt caged by her own breath. Emily said, "I will try again," but the promise sounded borrowed. Still, the ember stirred, clinging to the smallest draft of will. That evening she visited her parents, the small living room preserved like a shrine to old rules. Her mother adjusted lace doilies, as if tidying could fix what work had broken. Her father cleared his throat and weighed silence like a verdict. Emily said, "I was laid off," and the words felt like a door closing behind her. Her mother sighed. "You never make things easy," with a smile that apologized to the air. Her father said, "Maybe an assistant role would suit you," and the sentence landed like a chain. Emily smiled thinly to keep the peace she never owned. Old lessons circled, whispering that blending in was safer than being seen. She stood to leave before her resolve went limp. Emily said, "I'll figure it out," and stepped into the cold, clutching dignity like a fragile glass. On Wednesday she sat across a conference table for a rushed interview that smelled of coffee and indifference. The hiring manager scanned her resume like a grocery list. He said, "We need loud drivers, not quiet thinkers," and scribbled on a pad. Emily said, "I ship outcomes, even if I don't shout," but her voice carried like paper in wind. A second interviewer glanced at his phone and asked a question she had already answered. She felt her pulse scribble graffiti on her ribs. The manager smiled politely and said, "We'll be in touch," which meant goodbye dressed for Sunday. She shook hands that were already reaching past her. Emily stepped outside, and the sky pressed low like wet wool. She said, "I refuse to vanish," but grief tugged at the hem of the vow. Back home, Emily opened a battered notebook and wrote truths she had avoided naming. She listed the habits that kept her small, and the fears that rented space in her bones. She said, "Control what I can, endure what I must, choose how I respond." The kettle whistled like a distant alarm, and she let it sing without rushing. Mark called and did not wait for pleasantries. He said, "You are not fragile, you are rehearsed in restraint," and the line went quiet. Emily said, "I am tired of apologizing for breathing," and the words landed with welcome weight. She wrote them at the top of the page and underlined twice. The room felt larger when she named the prison walls. She said, "Tomorrow I challenge one lie," and the promise sounded carved, not borrowed. On Friday she walked into a community center to volunteer for a resume clinic, palms damp, but steps steady. A teenager hunched over a blank form like it might bite. "White?" Emily said, "We'll start with what you're proud of," and the boy's shoulders loosened by inches. She guided him through verbs that carried weight and stories that proved motion. Mark texted, "That's the swing," and she almost laughed. When the boy said, "No one asked me what I'm good at," the room tilted with meaning. Emily said, "Today we asked," and felt her own outline sharpen. Outside, the wind cut clean through her coat, but it felt bracing, not cruel. She said, "One lie down," and the ember brightened enough to show a path, even if the street ahead stayed dark. By noon, the newsfeed sparkled with a product launch that used her phrasing word for word, and Emily felt the floor tilt. The headline sang victory, while her name vanished like steam. She clicked the press kit, and the taglines matched the lines she had drafted in quiet overtime. Emily said, "This is my deck," in another suit, and her hands went cold. She dug into an old backup drive, opening timestamps like doors in a long corridor. The metadata showed her file renamed last month, author stripped, owner changed to Claire Morgan. Emily said, "They wore my voice like a mask, and the ember inside snapped to flame." She printed side-by-side pages and drew quick circles, proof forming a map. The room hummed with a new electricity that felt like decision. Emily said, "I was not dismissed for lack of value. I was removed to erase a signature." The thought steadied her breathing like a metronome. She snapped the folder shut and reached for her coat. The day no longer felt indifferent. It felt ready. She met Mark at a riverside cafe, where gulls heckled the water and the wind bit clean. He skimmed the pages, jaw setting like poured concrete. Mark said, "This is not coincidence. This is extraction." Emily watched his eyes, weighing whether he would step forward or step back. He sighed and rubbed his temples before the hard truth arrived. Mark said, I sat on the resource panel when they cut your roll. I argued to keep you, then I caved to politics. The words struck like hail, and then melted into a colder rain. Emily said, "You knew the shape of the knife," and he did not flinch. Mark said, "I suspected Claire moved your work, but I had no proof, and I chose my silence." The admission landed without ornament, creating space for a possible repair. Emily said, "Then help me name it clearly and cleanly." The gulls shrieked like alarms no one could ignore. Mark nodded and pushed the folder back to her. He said, "We go precise. We go public, not petty." That night became an excavation site, and Emily tunneled through emails with the patience of a miner who knows the seam is near. She traced a thread where Claire forwarded Emily's draft to a private channel at 2:13 a.m. The subject line read "polish and present," and the body held her paragraphs untouched. Emily said, "You did not polish, you paraded." Further down, a calendar attachment placed the launch rehearsal the day after her layoff. Each click wrote a cleaner sentence in the case she was building. She exported version history, the screen glowing like a lamp in fog. Mark sent a message with legal guidelines, tight and calm. He said, "No insults, just facts with dates." The restraint tasted like steel but felt safe to hold. Emily said, "I will not scorch the field. I will draw the map." She gathered screenshots into a single folder whose name felt like a verdict. The night outside pressed dark and steady, almost supportive. Morning found Emily in the lobby of Claire's building, where marble shone like guarded silence. Claire arrived with a smile sharpened for meetings, and not for mercy. Emily said, "Your launch deck carries my lines, dates and structure," and handed a concise summary. Claire skimmed, then laughed with practiced air. Claire said, "We iterate as a team," and slid the pages back. Emily watched the tell, a small twitch at the timestamp column. She pressed, voice even. Emily said, "You forwarded my draft at 2:13 a.m., then renamed the author before rehearsal." Claire's eyes flashed with a brief calculation that felt like weather changing. Mark stepped from behind a pillar, like a witness summoned. Mark said, "I will confirm the panel decision and share the archive path." The lobby quieted, as if waiting for a verdict. Emily said, "I am not here for revenge. I am here for attribution and record." The marble no longer looked cold. It looked reflective. By evening, Emily drafted a public statement that read like a ledger, not a bonfire. She listed dates, file names, and version hashes, then named the work without naming villains. Emily said, "This is my authorship record and correction," and breathed easier. Mark reviewed each line, pruning heat and leaving weight. He said, "Clean, defensible, human," and sent her a thumbs up she actually welcomed. She attached the timeline and posted, palms damp and steady. The notification bell chimed like a small drum in a growing march. A former client replied with a memory of her late-night fix that saved a demo. Another colleague added an early draft with her initials intact. Emily said, "The truth travels best when it carries receipts," and the line felt earned. She closed the laptop and stood taller than the room. The night did not soften, but it did open. She could see through it. Emily woke to a storm of messages, her statement spreading faster than she had braced for. Former coworkers tagged her name beside screenshots she thought were buried. Journalists sent requests for comment that felt like torches in her inbox. She said, "This was supposed to be quiet correction, not spectacle." Her phone buzzed until it rattled on the table, and her pulse raced to match. She remembered the version of herself who stayed silent to avoid ripples, and realized that woman was gone. Mark called, his voice low but steady. He said, "You opened the door, now walk through it." Emily steadied her breathing, repeating, "Not revenge, attribution. Truth only." She stepped to the window, watching rain streak glass. The city blurred but alive. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, but both were cleansing. By afternoon, Claire called, her voice slick but edged. Claire said, "You've made this messy. You've made me look like a thief." Emily kept her tone even. She said, I didn't name you. The documents did. Silence stretched like wire. Claire hissed, do you know what this will cost me? Emily replied, what it already cost me was dignity. But now I have it back. The line clicked dead, but the air felt clearer. She leaned back in her chair, pulse steadier. For the first time in years, she had spoken without apology. Mark texted a single line, that's the swing, and she smiled faintly. She said, the cycle is breaking, and the words felt true in her mouth. The storm outside slowed to drizzle, softening light across her face. Later, she walked through her old office building, not as an employee but as a guest for a community panel. The lobby air still smelled of polish and ambition, but her steps no longer trembled. She saw familiar faces glance with shock, some with quiet respect. Emily said, I survived erasure. I am still here. On stage, she spoke of attribution and the quiet labor that builds unseen foundations. She said, resilience is not silence. It is insisting on being heard even after years of being ignored. Applause rose like a tide, not thunderous but steady, carrying her voice forward. Mark stood at the back, arms folded, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Emily felt the ember in her chest flare brighter, warming instead of burning. That night, scrolling through responses, Emily found a message from a younger colleague she barely remembered. It read, you gave me courage today. I thought my voice didn't matter. Emily covered her mouth, fighting tears, whispering, this is why. For years she believed her fight was for dignity alone. But now she saw the ripples. She texted back, your voice always matters. Never shrink to fit a room that fears your volume. Her chest felt lighter than it had in years, like chains slipping loose. She said, it wasn't just for me. Outside, the moon broke free from clouds, silver light spilling into her room, casting her reflection on the glass. This time she met her own gaze, and did not look away. On Saturday morning, Emily stood at the edge of a crowded plaza where a grassroots rally gathered. She hadn't planned to speak, but someone handed her the mic, and silence spread expectantly. She said, I spent years whispering so others could shout over me. That cycle ends today. The crowd answered with applause that surged like a wave, strangers nodding as if they had waited to hear the same truth. She felt her chest expand, voice firm without tremor. She said, our work, our names, our dignity must not be erased. We break cycles by refusing to vanish. The air rang with cheers, the sound echoing against glass towers. Emily lowered the mic, and for the first time she felt weightless. She smiled to herself and whispered, I am no longer invisible. Emily walked into the auditorium where the corporate board had convened, every step echoing like a drumbeat. Her evidence packet rested under her arm, heavy with truth. Claire sat near the front, her gaze sharp and cold. Emily's chest tightened, but she kept her posture upright. The chairman cleared his throat and asked, do you wish to make a statement? Emily nodded, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. She said, I bring documentation that shows my work was taken, stripped of authorship, and paraded as another's. I am here to reclaim credit, not to destroy careers. Murmurs rippled through the room, but Emily felt anchored by her own words. For the first time, she was not explaining herself. She was declaring herself. She locked eyes with Claire, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Emily whispered under her breath, no more erasure. Claire rose to her feet, voice sharp as she declared, this is a personal attack, not fact. She waved a tablet displaying a version of the project with her name glowing at the top. Emily took a breath, unfolding printed sheets like stepping stones across water. She said, this document shows the first draft with my signature and timestamps weeks before your copy appeared. The chairman leaned forward, scanning the papers, his brow furrowing. Claire's smile faltered, her confidence thinning like mist in sunlight. Mark stood from the gallery, his voice cutting through. He said, I was on the panel. I saw Emily's drafts before they were erased. I confirmed the chain of custody. Gasps fluttered across the room. Emily felt the ember inside surge into a steady flame. She said, "I do not fear silence anymore. I fear injustice unchallenged." The chairman tapped the table, his voice grave. "We must review this evidence fully, but the clarity here cannot be ignored." Claire shifted, her composure cracking as whispers filled the rows. Emily held her ground, resisting the urge to shrink. She said, "This was never about revenge. This is about the right to one's own work and the dignity of being acknowledged." Claire's jaw tightened, but her silence betrayed her. Mark's eyes caught Emily's, and in that moment she felt the chains of invisibility fall away. For years she had been spoken over, edited out, and ignored, but now her voice filled the space and could not be erased. She said softly to herself, "I am finally visible." The room hushed, and even in the silence she felt stronger than she ever had. As the board recessed, Emily stepped outside into the courtyard, the winter air sharp in her lungs. Mark followed, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. He said, "You didn't just survive, you shifted the ground beneath them." Emily looked at the sky, gray clouds breaking into fragments of blue. She said, "For years I believed silence was safety, but silence nearly erased me." Mark smirked faintly and said, "And now?" She answered, "Now I see silence was the real thief." The city sounds drifted into the courtyard, horns, footsteps, chatter, but none of it drowned her sense of arrival. She stood taller, her breath no longer shaky but deep and deliberate. She whispered to herself, "The climax is not their verdict. It is mine." That evening, Emily returned home and placed the folder of evidence on her shelf, not as a burden but as a trophy of survival. The apartment felt different, no longer a cage but a witness to her rise. She brewed tea slowly, each motion deliberate, her breath even. She said, "I am not erased. I am rewritten in fire." The phone buzzed again, this time with messages of support flooding in from colleagues and strangers alike. She smiled, a genuine expression unweighted by fear. For the first time in years, she did not feel like she was waiting for approval. She already carried it within. Emily whispered, "This is not the end. This is the center." The room seemed to hum with quiet warmth, as if walls, once heavy, now exhaled with her. Morning light spilled into Emily's apartment, soft and golden, touching every corner like a gentle witness. She sat at her desk, not to beg for approval, but to draft her own proposal, a project she had envisioned for years, but never dared to begin. She whispered, "No more waiting for permission." Her hands moved with deliberate ease, words forming with weight and clarity. Mark's message blinked on her phone, "Proud doesn't cover it." She smiled, whispering back, "I finally see myself." For the first time her work felt unshaken by fear, like bricks laid on solid ground. The silence in the room was no longer heavy, it was fertile, ready to carry the sound of her becoming. Later that day, Emily walked through her neighborhood, noticing details she once ignored, the laughter of children, the rhythm of footsteps, the hum of daily life. She thought, "The world is not smaller than me. I am part of it." A neighbor waved, and she returned it with a smile that wasn't forced. For years she had moved through these streets invisible, head down, avoiding connection. Now she felt the ground beneath her feet like an ally. She whispered, "I belong here." The cold air filled her lungs, bracing but not punishing, and she inhaled deeper than before. Every step sounded like a declaration that she had survived, endured, and transformed. At a small workshop, Emily stood before a group of young professionals, sharing lessons carved from her scars. She said, "Silence is not humility, it is surrender. Speak, even if your voice shakes." Faces turned toward her with recognition, some nodding, others scribbling notes. She remembered sitting in those chairs once, wishing someone would give her permission to be bold. Now, she was the one offering it freely. She said, "Your work carries your name. Do not let anyone peel it away." The applause that followed was gentle but full, carrying her words into the hearts of others. Emily smiled, realizing she was no longer teaching herself to be brave. She was teaching others to begin. That evening, she met Mock again at the diner where hard truths had once cut her raw. This time the booth felt different, less like judgment and more like camaraderie. Mark raised his coffee and said, "You broke the circle." Emily smirked, stirring sugar slowly, and replied, "No, I redrew it." They sat in easy silence, the kind built on battles fought and survived. Mark leaned back, studying her with rare softness. "You'll help others see their light, won't you?" he asked. Emily nodded. "I already have." The neon sign outside buzzed, casting red glow across the window, but instead of oppressive, it felt like a badge of survival. The night beyond wasn't darker, it was waiting. Alone on her balcony, Emily gazed over the city skyline bathed in silver moonlight. She whispered, "I was once invisible, now I carry my own fire." The wind lifted her hair crisp and clean, and she breathed deeply, unafraid. The skyline shimmered, towers reflecting her steadiness back to her. She imagined her younger self, the quiet girl who hid in the background and whispered, "You made it here. You were always enough." A quiet smile curved her lips, not triumphant but certain. She turned back toward her apartment, steps light, as if the world itself was no longer heavy. The story was not ending. It was beginning anew.